In the peaceful city of Salinas, a married couple had been living happily together for many years. But one day, everything changed when they noticed their home's heating system had stopped working properly. When they went to investigate, a horrifying truth began to emerge. On January 14th, 1998, the husband, Jim, crawled under the house to inspect the heating unit located in the crawl space beneath the kitchen floor, a narrow area designed for ventilation, moisture control, and housing electrical and plumbing systems common in wooden homes across California. As he placed his hands on the cold ground and started following the faint beam of his flashlight, Jim carefully scanned every corner of the cramped space. In the distance, he noticed something unusual. As he moved closer, he saw what appeared to be a pair of sneakers. Only the toes were visible, while the rest was buried in the soil. A chilling sense of dread washed over him. Jim quickly backed out, shaken, and told his wife about the strange discovery. The moment Jim mentioned the sneakers, something clicked in Sandra's mind. Just days earlier, a neighbor had told her about a mysterious disappearance that happened 14 years ago, right inside this very house. The missing person was a 16-year-old boy named Christopher Allen DeNoyer. Unable to shake the growing sense of unease, Sandra began to suspect the shoes might be connected to Christopher. Not long after, she grabbed a flashlight and crawled under the kitchen herself. Just as Jim described, she found the partially buried sneakers. She began digging around them to pull them out, but they wouldn't budge, as if something was anchoring them firmly in place. That strange resistance only made Sandra more determined. She continued digging deeper until her hands struck something solid beneath the surface. Terrified, she scrambled out and called to Jim, insisting they contact the police immediately. Within hours, officers and a forensic team arrived at the scene. And the terrifying secret buried for 14 years was finally uncovered. The reason the shoes couldn't be removed? They were still on the feet of a body. As the police dug about 12 inches beneath the surface of the crawl space, they unearthed a full human skeleton. The body was still wearing a shirt, underwear, and sneakers, indicating the victim had been buried shortly after death. Based on a preliminary analysis of the remains, experts estimated that the body had been buried for anywhere between 5 and 50 years. The physical characteristics, including a height of 5 feet 10 inches, an estimated age of 14 to 18, male and Caucasian, were a strong match for Christopher, who had been reported missing many years earlier. To confirm the identity, investigators turned to dental records. The skeleton's canine teeth had a fixed retainer, and Christopher was known to have worn braces. This provided compelling evidence that the remains were in fact his. After confirming the identity, investigators continued to examine the surrounding area. They discovered a set of keys, a pack of cigarettes, and a lighter, items known to belong to Christopher. Nearby, they also found a .38 caliber handgun and several scattered bullets. The body had 2 gunshot wounds, one to the back of the head and another to the torso. Forensic analysis indicated that Christopher had been shot at close range while his back was turned. As the investigation progressed, the police also began looking into Christopher's family background. After his parents' divorce, Christopher lived with his father, Michael DeNoyer, while his younger sister, Sherry, stayed with their mother, Dale. The relationship between Christopher and his father was strained. Michael was known to be overly strict, constantly pressuring his son to study and imposing rigid rules. As Christopher entered adolescence, he began to feel suffocated by the tight control. His grades declined, and tensions between father and son grew worse. Eventually, Dale decided to bring Christopher to live with her. At that time, she had remarried a man named Jackson Villarta, who was 50 years old and had built a new family that included 3 children. Under one roof, Dale now had to care for 5 kids, 2 from her previous marriage, Christopher and Sherry, and 3 with her current husband. At first, Christopher seemed to adjust well to his new home. He got along with his step-siblings and continued his studies regularly. However, trouble soon developed in his relationship with his stepfather, Jackson. Compared to Michael, Jackson was even more controlling and emotionally distant. He made no effort to bond with Christopher or Sherry and treated them like outsiders. This emotional detachment stemmed from the fact that Jackson had never truly accepted Christopher and Sherry as his own. He believed their presence forced his biological children to share not just affection, but also financial resources. Over time, his resentment turned into petty and exclusionary behavior, such as locking up snacks in a cabinet, labeling food and drinks in the fridge as his personal property, and forbidding anyone else from touching them. Such blatant favoritism deeply wounded Christopher. While Sherry often stayed quiet to avoid confrontation, Christopher, in the midst of puberty, reacted with anger and frequently clashed with Jackson. The one caught in the middle was Dale. Although she tried multiple times to mediate, the conflict between her son and her husband only worsened, casting a heavy atmosphere over the household. Not long after, Dale had to leave town for work, leaving Jackson alone with the children. Worried about the unstable situation at home, she kept calling throughout the day to check in. Around midday, when she asked what Christopher was doing, Jackson told her he had gone out to meet his girlfriend. Relieved, Dale assumed everything was fine. But later that evening, when she returned home, Christopher was still nowhere to be found. Right then, his girlfriend arrived at the house, visibly concerned. She said they had planned to meet that day, but Christopher never showed up, despite her waiting for hours. She also mentioned that lately, he had been acting strangely. Sensing that something wasn't right, Dale immediately began calling some of her son's closest friends to ask if they knew where Christopher might be. To her surprise, a few of them revealed that he had been struggling a lot lately and had even talked about running away from home. Overcome with worry, Dale reached out to neighbors and relatives, but no one had seen or heard from Christopher. When all efforts to locate him failed, Dale filed a missing person report with the police. However, officers treated it as a typical case of a teenager running away due to adolescent stress. At the time, Dale also considered the possibility that Christopher had left because he couldn't stand living with his stepfather anymore. But just a few days later, a strange odor began to fill the house. The children wondered if it might be the smell of rotting fish. It became so strong it was hard to breathe, yet no one could determine where it was coming from. Amid this, Jackson claimed that his pet python had gone missing. The entire household was thrown into disarray searching for the snake, but to no avail. Dale noticed how focused her husband was on the missing reptile, while their son was still unaccounted for. She began to feel uneasy and resentful of Jackson's cold, indifferent attitude. A few days later, an unexpected telegram arrived, allegedly from Christopher. He said he was on his way to Los Angeles and apologized for not being able to stay longer. He claimed that Jackson had been right all along and apologized to his mother for his past behavior. He added that he would return later or send someone else to collect his belongings and assured Dale not to worry. Once he joined the football team, he said he would be in touch again. But the moment Dale read the message, she felt something was off. The tone was unlike anything she had ever heard Christopher use. Phrases like, "I'm sorry for my behavior," or "Jackson was right," felt unnatural. Sherry, his sister, also believed the writing didn't sound like him. Most suspicious of all was the line praising Jackson, considering the well-known tension between the two. What also raised red flags was Christopher's mention of joining the National Football League, NFL. Although he had been a standout player on his high school football team, he had never expressed any desire to play professionally, let alone mentioned plans to join a prestigious league like the NFL. This only deepened Dale's conviction that her son hadn't left of his own accord, that something was seriously wrong. She reported her suspicions to the police, suggesting that the telegram had been sent by someone else to mislead her and halt the search. Refusing to sit back and wait, Dale took matters into her own hands. She contacted a local dairy company to print Christopher's photo on milk cartons and started posting flyers at bus stops throughout the area. Time passed, and Dale continued searching relentlessly for 4 long years, but made no progress. The police failed to uncover any new leads. Meanwhile, her relationship with Jackson grew increasingly strained. They fought often. Jackson accused Dale of becoming obsessed with the search and neglecting the rest of the family, while Dale grew more and more disheartened by his apathy toward Christopher's disappearance. Although Dale and Jackson later tried to reconcile, the emotional distance between them remained insurmountable. Eventually, they divorced. For the next 14 years, Dale quietly searched for her son, never giving up hope, until one day, she received a shocking phone call from the police. They believed they had found Christopher. What completely devastated Dale was the discovery that his remains had been found beneath the kitchen floor of their old home, the very house she had lived in for years, unaware of the horror hidden below. What stood out most was that the body had been buried in a spot that was only accessible from inside the kitchen. The only entry point was inside the house, and there were no signs of forced entry. This made it highly unlikely that the killer was an outsider, and suspicion quickly turned toward members of Jackson's household. Shortly after learning that Christopher's body had been found beneath the floor of their former home, Jackson reacted with an unsettling calmness. He appeared cooperative during the investigation and admitted to having had serious conflicts with Christopher, but dismissed them as the usual friction between a stepfather and a rebellious teenage boy. One detail that caught investigators' attention was Jackson's account of the afternoon and evening hours, specifically from noon to 8 p.m. on the day Christopher disappeared. Jackson claimed he hadn't seen Christopher during that time and insisted that if there had been a body beneath the kitchen, he would have noticed the smell. Yet he reported smelling nothing unusual. As soon as he said this, his children looked visibly shocked. They remembered clearly that the entire house had been overwhelmed by a nauseating stench for days after Christopher went missing. Jackson had been the only one who didn't seem to notice. Given these suspicious inconsistencies, police obtained a warrant to search the entire house where Jackson had lived. What they found was revealing. Jackson suffered from compulsive hoarding disorder. He had rarely thrown anything away, and the home was overflowing with decades' worth of clutter. Seizing the opportunity, investigators combed through the house meticulously and recovered a trove of documents, phone bills, utility statements, and tax returns dating back 14 years. Among these, the phone records showed that it was Jackson who had sent the telegram using Christopher's name. What followed was a flood of new evidence that intensified suspicion. Jackson owned 2 handguns, a .22 caliber and a .38 caliber. Forensic analysis revealed that each gun left a unique twist pattern on the bullets it fired, similar to a fingerprint. When the bullet recovered from the crime scene was compared to Jackson's guns, the rifling marks were a perfect match. Ironically, it was Jackson's compulsive hoarding that ultimately exposed his crime. If he had simply disposed of the weapon, the police might never have found the critical evidence even after 14 years. But because he kept everything, including the murder weapon, the truth finally came to light. In May 2000, the trial for Christopher's murder began. Jackson continued to deny all charges and insisted he was innocent. Based on the evidence gathered, prosecutors reconstructed the likely sequence of events on the day of the crime. They argued that while Dale was away, a heated argument broke out between Jackson and Christopher. When Jackson was unable to control Christopher, he felt insulted and lost control. Just as Christopher attempted to leave, Jackson pulled out a gun and shot him from behind. The prosecution's theory was accepted by the majority of the jury. However, a single juror objected to a first-degree murder conviction, leading to Jackson being found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 17 years. But the story didn't end there. In 2017, as his parole review approached, Jackson, believing he might have a chance at early release, suddenly confessed to everything. It was the first time Jackson admitted to killing his stepson, hoping it would strengthen his case for parole. However, he offered no explanation, motive, or detail about the circumstances of the crime. Because of this lack of remorse and transparency, the parole board concluded he showed no genuine remorse and denied his petition. The most heartbreaking part of the case was that Dale had no idea her son's body had been buried right beneath the floor of the home they shared for years, while she tirelessly searched for him. Although she had once noticed a strange odor in the house, she never imagined the truth was literally beneath her feet. Dale was consumed with guilt for not discovering it sooner. In stark contrast to Dale's emotional torment, Jackson never showed signs of remorse. He only confessed after the body was found and parole became a possibility, 17 years after the trial. From the day Christopher went missing to the moment Jackson finally admitted guilt, nearly 30 years had passed. For Dale, the deepest pain was knowing that the man who murdered her son was her former husband, the father of her 4 other children. Even though Christopher's body was found after 14 years, her emotional wound has never healed. Before the dust could settle from Christopher's tragic case, another nightmare began to unfold quietly on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. In Gotemba City, Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan, a seemingly ordinary home was put up for auction in March 2010 after the previous owner defaulted on their debts. Within a short time, the property was sold to a new investor. Just weeks later, on May 5th, a cleaning crew was dispatched to prepare the property. But during their work, an unusual discovery was made. While clearing out items from a small storage shed in the backyard, one of the workers noticed a blue plastic tarp tightly sealed with tape lying in the corner. At first glance, its shape and placement made it seem like ordinary abandoned trash. Curious, the worker peeled away the tape to inspect it further. But as soon as the tarp was opened, a foul stench spread through the yard, and inside was the tightly wrapped body of a woman. Terrified, the worker immediately called the police. Fingerprint analysis quickly confirmed the victim's identity. 26-year-old Hiroko Hisamatsu, who had been missing for approximately 3 months. Since the body was found inside a storage shed located on the property, the police immediately summoned the home's previous owner, 44-year-old Kazuya Kawada. While investigating the connection between the victim and the man being questioned, police discovered that Kawada was Hiroko's ex-husband. The two had previously lived together in an apartment in Shizuoka City before divorcing. However, because the body was found in a house registered under Kawada's name, he quickly became the primary suspect. At the time, Kawada was also being prosecuted in a fraud case involving approximately $68,900, an amount that had led to the property's seizure and public auction. Just 3 days later, on May 8th, police officially arrested Kawada on charges of murder and corpse disposal. But the case didn't stop there. That same evening, national news networks across Japan aired a report on the crime. While watching the broadcast, a middle-aged woman was stunned to recognize the man on screen. He had once dated her daughter. His name instantly reopened an old wound. The daughter she and her husband had loved dearly, Kaori Hibino, had vanished in 2005 at the age of 22. For the past 5 years, they had searched relentlessly, but no trace of Kaori had ever been found. Now, seeing the man who once dated their daughter appear in the news accused of murder, they couldn't help but fear the worst. The next morning, Kaori's mother went straight to the police station to report what she knew. Realizing the potential link to the 2005 missing persons case, police broadened the investigation and began interrogating Kawada further. At first, he completely denied having any connection to Kaori's disappearance. But in August of that same year, 3 months after his arrest, following days of intense questioning, Kawada finally confessed. He had killed Kaori and disposed of her body. Based on his confession, on August 12th, police searched a vacant lot that Kawada directed them to. There, they found Kaori's remains inside a metal drum. Disturbingly, her body had also been wrapped in a plastic tarp, the same method used in Hiroko's murder. To fully understand how these crimes unfolded, we must go back to the year 2000. At that time, Kawada was still living with his first wife, Aiko, and their 3 children. He had built and moved with his family into a home in Gotemba City, the same house where the first body would later be discovered, and the same property that was eventually auctioned off following the fraud charges. However, that seemingly peaceful life began to unravel in 2002, when Kawada started a romantic relationship with Kaori, a young woman he had met at a bar. Kaori, then only 22 years old, worked part-time jobs to support herself. Because of the nature of her work, she could earn as much as $1,000 per night, giving her a lifestyle far more comfortable than many others her age. Kawada saw an opportunity and began borrowing money from Kaori. At one point, he even withdrew funds from her personal bank account without her permission. Still young and trusting, Kaori believed that this older man, despite his financial troubles, would eventually pay her back. But after 2 years, the total amount Kawada had borrowed from her had ballooned to $68,100. By the fall of 2005, after months of patience, Kaori began showing signs of frustration. She could no longer tolerate the fact that a man old enough to be her father had been taking her money with no intention of paying it back. Her anger grew even more intense when she learned that Kawata had a family and was using her money to support them. At that time, Kawata was working in home renovation and had a stable income. From Kaori's perspective, it was the right moment to demand repayment. She confronted him directly, asking him to honor his word and return the money. But Kawata's reaction shocked her. Instead of taking responsibility, he completely denied borrowing anything, claiming the money had merely been shared expenses during their relationship. Furious, Kaori warned him that if he refused to pay, she would go to the police. But Kawata remained defiant, denying any debt. His attitude quickly shifted from indifference to resentment and hatred, especially after he accidentally discovered in late October 2005 that Kaori had a savings account holding approximately $137,500. That discovery made Kawata feel deeply betrayed. In his eyes, Kaori was sitting on a large sum of money, yet continued pressuring him to return the $68,100 he had taken. The more cornered he felt, the angrier he became. Eventually, an extreme thought took root in his mind. If Kaori disappeared, not only would he escape his debt, he could also seize the rest of her money. And that thought quickly turned into action. Just one day after learning the full extent of her bank savings, Kawata went to Kaori's apartment and murdered her. He strangled her to death, wrapped her body in a plastic tarp, placed it inside a metal drum, and dumped it in a vacant lot approximately about half a meter from the apartment. What's alarming is that the lot Kawata chose wasn't isolated. It was a well-traveled area with regular foot traffic and active property management. Yet no one noticed anything unusual. But Kawata didn't stop at hiding the body. He also orchestrated an elaborate deception to mislead those around her. Using Kaori's phone, he sent text messages to her family, pretending she was still alive. In a message to her mother, he wrote that Kaori would be away for a while but was doing well and not to worry. Afterward, he withdrew the entire $137,500 from her account and spent the money on himself and his family. Having murdered Kaori and stolen her money, Kawata carried on as if nothing had happened. By December 2008, 3 years after the crime, his actions still hadn't been uncovered. Around that time, he began a new romantic relationship with Hiroko Hisamatsu, the woman whose body would later be found inside his former home. Hiroko was a divorced mother of 2 young children. For reasons that remain unclear, Kawata quickly became infatuated with her. After several months of dating, in June of that year, he divorced his previous wife and married Hiroko. The couple, along with Hiroko's children, moved into an apartment in Shizuoka Prefecture. According to neighbors, the family often went on walks together and appeared genuinely happy. While life with Hiroko in Shizuoka seemed peaceful on the surface, trouble was brewing elsewhere. Kawata's business had started failing, and the money he had taken from Kaori was now gone. His ex-wife and children were still living in the house in Gotemba, the same property he had mortgaged for a loan. That debt had gone unpaid for several months, and if it continued, the bank could repossess the house at any time. Financial stress quickly took a toll on their household. Arguments over daily expenses became frequent. The small apartment echoed with shouting, often followed by the sound of constant crying. Amid the rising tension, Kawata's actions only made things worse. He frequently visited the home where his ex-wife and their 3 children still lived. This deeply unsettled his new wife. At first, Hiroko assumed it was just fatherly concern. But as the visits became more frequent, her unease turned into frustration and eventually rage. Their relationship deteriorated to the point of no return. This simmering conflict exploded in February 2010 during a violent altercation. Kawata lost control and physically assaulted Hiroko so severely that an ambulance had to be called to take her to the emergency room. Just a few days later, on February 23rd, Hiroko was seen for the last time. From that moment on, she vanished without a trace. When questioned, Kawada quickly filed for divorce and claimed Hiroko had left him voluntarily. However, what she left behind made her family extremely concerned. Her 2 children, biological children from her previous marriage, had been abandoned. For her mother, it was impossible to believe that Hiroko would simply walk away from her children and leave them in the care of a man she barely trusted. Suspecting foul play, she immediately filed a missing person report with the police. While investigators were still struggling to find clues about Hiroko's disappearance, a new development emerged. In April, just 2 months later, Kawada was arrested for defrauding a 60-year-old woman of approximately $68,800. Worse still, the Gotemba house where his ex-wife and children lived was auctioned off. And it was during the cleanup process of that home that Hiroko's body was discovered inside a storage shed. Ironically, if the house had never been sold, the truth might have stayed buried behind that steel drum forever. But due to this unexpected turn of events, Kawada hadn't had the chance to dispose of the body and was exposed. When arrested, he deflected blame, claiming he had killed Hiroko to protect his ex-wife and children from harm. Over the span of 2 decades, 2 seemingly unrelated cases, one in California and one in Japan, shared a chilling common thread: betrayal, murder, and the concealment of a body beneath what was once considered a safe and familiar home. Secrets buried under floorboards and earth eventually rose to the surface because some truths never stay hidden forever. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.